hypocrisy is everywhere, it seems, which I'm aware of it all the time around the open inverted commas climate crisis, close inverted commas, where we get preached at all the time by the great and the good, by the rich, the famous, the powerful, and yet they insist on getting right up in our faces and having a laugh at our expense. It's increasingly getting on my nerves. I noticed that again just this week. This is the week in which Liz Truss emerged as the winner of the contest to find the new leader of the Conservative Party in Britain, and thereby the new Prime Minister of Great Britain. And the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen, God love her, is poorly, frail now, and elected to not come away from her traditional summer break in her Scottish estate of Balmoral and come back to Buckingham Palace and London, which would be the normal venue, that's the normal setting for meeting the new Prime Minister. She decided that she would stay up in Balmoral, and so the mountain went to Mohammed, or Mohammed went to the mountain, and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss had to go up. The former to tender his resignation from the post of Prime Minister, and the latter to be invited to form the next government. And what did they do? They both flew up on separate private jets. They didn't. I mean, they were both going. They know each other. They had a rough idea that they were where each other was going. And you know that way when you share a cab because someone you know is going to the same destination, and you both just jump in the same taxi rather than take two. They could at least have gone in the same private jet, or better yet, they could both have gone on the same commercial jet, or perhaps even better yet, they could both have gone on the same train. But in any event, when we're continually having to tolerate being preached at about how our every action matters and how it's down to every one of us to consider our carbon footprints and the rest of it. So it all got me thinking about the hypocrisy, and I am sick and tired of the way we're being preached at by the super wealthy, by the elites, on the subject of the climate crisis. And I'll come to the point in a minute, but it's so blatant now that we are expected to accept and to tolerate the fact that they can live their luxurious lives while we have to make adjustments to ours. And it's been going on for years. I mean, we'll go back as far as Al Gore, when he brought forth his documentary An Inconvenient Truth about climate emergency, global warming, climate change. And he ended up with a line where, to paraphrase, he was more or less saying that all of us were going to have to make adjustments to our lives. And really, no sooner did the documentary get broadcast than journalists pointed out and raised the issue with him that he lived in a 20-room mansion, which is fairly luxurious by any standards. And was it not in some ways hypocritical to be preaching about the necessity to downsize and live reduced lives when you're doing so from the comfort of a 20-bedroom mansion? And the point is, it didn't cause him to change his ways, and none of it ever causes any of them to change their ways. The examples are too numerous to count. What was it? Was it earlier this year? I think Sir Patrick Vallance, who was so to the fore in the COVID-19 adventure, the scientific advisor, he came forward and said that we'd all have to contemplate eating less meat and doing something about our carbon footprints, in the future. And there's no indication of a man like Sir Patrick Vallance actually putting his money where his mouth is and doing anything like that. We had to sit through the hypocrisy of COP26, when hundreds of private jets brought the elites into Glasgow so that they could pontificate about the changes that the proles, which is us, would have to make to our lives. There was a report published last year by Transport and Environment, which is a European clean transport campaign group, and it found that a single private jet can emit 2 metric tonnes of CO2 in just an hour. 2 metric tonnes of CO2. To put that in context, an average citizen of the European Union produces about 8.2 tonnes of emissions over the course of an entire year. Okay, so 8.2 tonnes in a year compared to 2 metric tonnes in just an hour coming out the back end of a private jet. Other figures, an average person produces 7 metric tonnes of CO2 annually, but celebrities have emitted an average of more than 3,300 metric tonnes from their private jets alone in a single year, or even just in a part of a year. The same report mentions super yachts. Professors from Indiana University have described super yachts as by far the worst asset to own from an environmental standpoint. An analysis of the top 20 billionaires in the world found that they emitted an average of 8,000 metric tonnes of CO2 in 2018. Okay, it's a few years ago now, of which 2/3 was caused by super yachts. There are more and more examples of it. You know, all the names of the guilty people. A few years ago, Leonardo DiCaprio, Katy Perry, Chris Martin, Harry Styles, Orlando Bloom and others all flew in their private jets, not the same private jets, different private jets, to a Google conference to discuss new ways to moralise about climate change. And Prince Harry was there, and he delivered his lecture while barefoot, because he's such a free-loving bohemian type. So we're confronted by this incessant, wearing, enervating hypocrisy, and in that way that that hypocrisy has its roots in actors and people who wear masks and present themselves as one thing while being something different underneath. There's something about these pontificating celebrities, Meghan Markle, Emma Thompson, there's another one, Leonardo DiCaprio, which is an exercise in redundancy. Because on the one hand, they want to be in our faces, moralising. They want to be highly visible, pontificating about how we should be living our lives. But the fact is, if they didn't fly around in their jets, or if they didn't punctuate their preaching by climbing out of stretch limos to walk the red carpet at premieres, or if they didn't live in enormous palisaded mansions with multiple rooms and swimming pools and all the rest of it, if they didn't do all of that, then they would be contributing meaningfully to the causes that they claim to champion. But they don't do that, because if they did live like that, they would be invisible. By definition, they would be living small lives. They would be devoid of publicity. These people are super rich. They don't need to work. They never need to make another movie. They never need to take part in any of that. They've got all the money that they will ever need. And they could just, if they meant it, downsize to smaller homes without their entourages, without their staff, without the necessity to fly in private jets, without the necessity of whole entourages of limousines and all the rest of it. But they would cease to exist then as celebs. They are trapped in a catch-22. Here's the thing. I'm banging on all the time about hypocrisy, and I think hypocrisy is definitely a part of it. And I think you could make a plausible case that some of these individuals are so insulated from reality on account of the lives that they have led. Now, Prince Harry might be one of those, because Prince Harry has never lived in a real world. Not really. He's always been insulated on account of his circumstances because of who and what he is. And it's possible that he, through no fault of his own, completely lacks self-awareness and just genuinely doesn't see what he's doing, or isn't able to consider it objectively, to look at himself as though from the outside and see how it might be perceived by somebody living in a council flat, suffering through the cold of the winter, to be preached at about the need to monitor one's every thought and deed by a barefoot prince who... Prince Harry, last week or the week before, he went to a one-day polo match in a private jet, and he had his kit transported in a separate car. He sent the kit in a car, and he jumped in a private jet. It's possible that he doesn't get it, but there's also hypocrisy there, and exactly where it's coming from is difficult to gauge. But I would suggest that so many of them have been so hypocritical for so long, despite being told over and over again that what they're doing is hypocritical. It seems unavoidable to me that it's perhaps from some of them deliberate, because what the elite want us to see and to know ultimately and to accept is that they are different and they are special. You know, as I said, Al Gore was pulled up a decade ago about saying everyone has to live a smaller life and live differently if we're going to save the planet. And somebody said, but you've got a 20-room mansion. Are you going to do anything about that? And he didn't. And that's not by accident. And that's not just on account of hypocrisy. I would suggest there's a possibility that he's acting in that way because he needs us to accept that the smaller lives and the absence of meat and the no jumping on board a plane doesn't relate to him at all. He will continue to do that because that is his right and privilege. I think to some extent we are being groomed to accept that a few of us will live that way and the rest of us will live the other way. You know, same with Meghan and Harry. They've been pulled up over and over again about using private jets. And other showbiz pals, Elton John would weigh in and say, it's not fair. You shouldn't be having a go at people for trying to, save the world. So they've been told, they've been made aware, and they continue to do it. And I think increasingly it's because they want us to see what they're doing. They want us to learn that they are the special. It's that extension of neo-feudalism, that the kings and the princes and the princesses will live one way, and us serfs and peasants will live another way. I don't think there's any way of avoiding it, and it's a very interesting evolution. If you go back into the past, you go back to ancient Greece. Socrates had a good line about fame is the perfume of heroic deeds. So that warriors, in particular, they kind of emanated fame, and fame lingered about them like a pleasant scent, and it came as a collateral benefit of their heroism and their bravery. And in that ancient world, in those ancient civilizations, to be good, to be famous, was to be ostentatious, visibly rich, visibly beautiful, garbed in the finest raiment, the finest silks or the finest furs or whatever. The onlookers, the hoi polloi, us, we wanted, those ancient Greek and ancient Roman audiences wanted their famous people to be outrageously rich and to live luxurious lives. That was part of it. And then along came Christianity. Constantine, the Roman emperor, in the early part of the 4th century AD, he converted to Christianity, and from that point on there was an evolution that went on where Christianity came to the fore. And Christianity had within it that idea of humility and equality, and the most idealised and the most desirable way of life was a stripped back, humble, modest life. And then, of course, that's probably uncomfortable for those that can afford to live otherwise. And so the rich could buy indulgences. They could actually offset their sinning and their excess by basically giving the church money. And what have we got in the present day? You've got the super rich who like to tell us that they're offsetting their use of private jets with they offset their carbon, don't they? They pay somebody to plant some pine trees somewhere. That offsets their carbon production. And in the years ahead, what you're absolutely going to have, it's been suggested by the World Economic Forum and others, that we would all have a certain carbon allowance in our lives, But if you and I are too poor to have that foreign holiday or to make that flight, we could sell our carbon allowance to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. We could also chip in our modest allowance, and they could use it up because after all they can afford to use it. So there's not a great deal of difference hypothetically from the kind of indulgences that rich people used to obtain from the church by buying them and offsetting your carbon emissions by planting a conifer plantation or having somebody do that on your behalf. So there's nothing new. There never is. And what we plainly have to acknowledge and realise is that we're being told again by the neo-aristocrats, the neo-feudal overlords, that they have the money, they have the luxurious lifestyles, and by our sheer numbers, by having inconveniently produced 7.5 billion of ourselves, we're really cluttering up the beaches at Saint-Tropez and the slopes at Val d'Isère, and we've really got to be cleared away from there, scum like us. That's really what we're being told. We've got to eat bugs and plants and stay at home and turn off the heating so that they can fly in their private jets and their super yachts and soak up our allowances for their own lavish lifestyles. That's what's happening. And it's the hypocrisy that bothers me a little bit, but really what grinds my gears is the fact we're being told, you little people need to live and behave differently because it's really making a mess of the planet and it's destroying the view from my windows. So you have to stop eating that, you have to stop going there aboard those aircraft, you have to stop driving your horrible little cars, you have to clear the motorways and all the rest of it. We are plebs. They are kings and princes and princesses, and we just have to look on at their luxurious lifestyles. It really bothers me.